Last section of Chapter 2 is Section 5. We're going to talk about taxes and subsidies. Um, Varian also talks about rationing, which I do not talk about during the lecture. We'll just concentrate on taxes and subsidies. Um, so here, taxes are pretty straightforward. The way to think about taxes is that it affects the budget line in a particular way. Like if the price is P1, you add the excise tax, the quantity or excise tax. An excise tax is a specific tax per unit, right? So tax per quantity purchased. So an example, or some examples, excise tax on cigarettes. Federal excise tax on cigarettes is $1.01 per pack, and then the state excise taxes vary drastically across the different states. Excise tax on gasoline is 18.4 cents per gallon. Again, that's the federal tax. You add on for state taxes. Um, so you could think about that tax. If the tax is 18.4, if you have a good and it sells for $1, and you have an 18.4 cent excise tax, then effectively the price to the consumer becomes $1.18 per gallon. Ad valorem taxes work just the same way, except that they're percentage taxes rather than per unit purchased taxes. So the amount of the tax paid has to change with the amount of the purchase. Great example is sales taxes. In Virginia, the state sales tax is 5.3%, and there's an additional 0.7% local option. So certain localities have chosen to add on a 0.7% to that tax. So, so in the Richmond area, if you have a price of X1 1, effectively the price effectively the price is 1 plus 0.053 times P1. So if P1 is equal to $1, you pay 1.053 cents, or $1 and 5.3 cents. Obviously, if you pay $10, then it'd be then if you have $10, it's 5%. Your effective amount you pay is 1.053 times that. So what is that, on the order of 50 cents, 53 cents on the $10 purchase. Subsidies work exactly the same way, except that where it increases the price with a tax, with a subsidy, you're decreasing the price. Effectively, a subsidy decreases the price to consumers. And so I say subsidies are parallel but opposite. So instead of P1 plus T, becomes with a subsidy P1 minus the subsidy rate. And a good example of a subsidy is the deductibility of charitable contributions, right? So the tax law affects the effective price of charitable contributions. And I'll just kind of talk about this in terms of a change in the tax law. Starting in 2018, there's a new tax law deduction. It also changed rates, but it had a bigger effect on the standard deduction. So under both old and new law, charitable contributions are deductible if the taxpayer itemizes deductions instead of claiming the standard deduction. Here's the deal, though. In 2018, the standard deduction approximately doubled, so that many fewer people end up in a situation where they are itemizing. So let's just think about this case and imagine somebody who has a it has itemized deductions, and let's suppose that those deductions in both 2017 and 2018 are, take the first case, let's say they're greater than $12,000, okay? So that's a lot of itemized deductions. Well, notice, and this is again for singles, there's a taxable income range. Given that the tax rate declined somewhat, the effective subsidy declined, right? The subsidy, the subsidy for charitable deductions was, decreased the price to 0.75 effective dollars per dollar contribution, so a subsidy rate of 0.25. Well, in 2018, the tax rate changes, so the subsidy rate is a little bit different. I also want to point out, take the case of somebody where they have, say, total itemized deductions, again, in both years, they're somewhere between these two numbers, 6,350 and 12,000. Well, in 2017, their subsidy rate would be 0.25. But when the standard deduction went to $12,000, and assuming you don't increase that the standard deduction is the same in both of these years, well, now with the standard deduction being, the amount of itemized deductions being the same in both years, now, gosh, this person who had, I don't know, $8,000, $9,000 in itemized deduction now takes the standardized deduction. This doesn't apply, right? Because they're going to take the itemized deduction, so the effective subsidy rate for charitable contributions becomes zero because they're no longer going to itemize, and so that subsidy does not apply to them. So that made a big difference in terms of the incentives for charitable contributions. Now, Varian provides some other examples, and they include rationing, tax and consumption above a certain level. I'm going to let you read about those on your own. They're pretty straightforward. The example I'm going to concentrate on here is how the food stamp program, now called the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, how that affects budget lines under two different programs. So, or a different kind of a regime changer in the program. So there was a substantial change in the structure of the food stamp assistance program after 1979. And so here's kind of our stylized situation. We're going to assume a family of four. They've got a monthly income of $300, and we're going to assume that prices are unchanged, right? Before and after this change, we're going to assume, for the sake of being able to analyze this, that the prices have not changed. And also note, the amount of the subsidy, in fact, does change at different family sizes with different incomes, etc. And here's an example. We're gonna say, hey, there's two goods. There's food and everything else, right? And we're also, for the sake of this exercise, we are going to not only take the price of other goods as being equal to 1, we're actually going to think of expenditures on food here, total expenditures on food. And so effectively, both the price of food and other goods is equal to 1. You spend $1 on food, you get 1 unit of food. So there's some information here, but we're going to get an extension and implication question here about filling in the missing components from Varian. So I want to warn you that Varian's graphs are only approximate; they're not to scale. Right? So here's the situation pre-79. Here's the situation post-79. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go to the in-class questions. So pre-79. Eligible households could purchase food stamps, okay? And the maximum for a family in the income group we're talking about, they could purchase a maximum monthly allotment of $153. And that $153 in food stamps cost that household $83, right? So essentially what you have there is that a household could pay $1 and get $1.84 worth of food over that range, right? So price of food is effectively 0.454 of all other goods, right? So that's the effective price of food in that particular range. And then after that $153, you get no further subsidy. After 1979, the situation is different. Their families were just given a grant of food stamps. They didn't purchase them. There was just an in-kind transfer of food stamp, and it was based upon income and family size. And the grant is an in-kind transfer. In other words, here's these food stamps you can just use for one product, food. You can't use it for other goods. And in the situation we're looking at here, it assumes, again, for the situation we're talking about, this family with that income and a family of four, the in-kind transfer was $200, right? So there's kind of the outline here, right? That's kind of what happened. We have some information on how the budget lines changed with the new program. But what we don't have is we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle filled in, right? And so here's some in-class questions corresponding to this situation. So here I've just repeated exactly the same information as in the lecture, but then I'm asking these questions. First of all, characterize the budget line without the food stamp program. What's the vertical intercept, horizontal intercept? What's the slope? And then, again, in the pre-79 situation, what's the maximum amount of food and the maximum amount of all other goods with the program, right? With the food stamp program, what are the horizontal and vertical intercepts? What's the slope of the budget line up to $153 in food? What's the slope of the budget line for the amount of food greater than $153? So those are all questions referring to this situation. And then I ask several similar questions for the situation with the in-kind transfer. And those are in-class questions. Have your answers written down and ready for each of those questions